What is up? Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to the Longhorn Livestream on the On Texas Football Channel. Aaron Hogan, CJ Vogel, and the lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers covering you for the next hour plus with your questions and conversation on all things Texas football, coming off of the end of the college football season last night. Obviously, unfortunately, next 8 months will be a lot of talking and conversation and roster construction and everything else in between. It'll be a transformative year in 2024. Safe to say, with the end of the 4-team playoff, the addition of the 12-team playoff, new conference looks in the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC. So much will change into 2024. We'll look back at the game last night with Michigan and Washington, and certainly look forward to what's to come immediately for the Longhorns and the big picture. And we're looking forward to doing it with you here over the next hour. Plus, your questions and super chats, always encouraged and exciting to have you with us. And guys, how we doing coming off the game last night? CJ, Rod, we ready to talk some Texas football?
Yes, sir. Let's get it going.
Well, let's start with you, CJ. What's the latest? Longhorns had a couple of transfer portal prospects in over the weekend. A wide receiver and a defensive tackle. There's also another wide receiver that's on the radar screen. What are you seeing as far as the immediate portal conversation surrounding Texas football?
Yeah, this past weekend, Texas hosted Liberty wide receiver C.J. Daniels as well as Houston defensive tackle Jamari Caldwell, both of which have been kind of pinned and pointed at right now by the Texas staff as key immediate, possible options for the Texas 2024 roster construction. Clearly, Texas is losing a lot at both positions at wide receiver, with a number of wide receivers opting to go to the NFL, as well as the defensive line with Devondre Sweat, Byron Murphy opting to go to the league, and Troll Carter now having committed to Auburn out of the NCAA transfer portal as well. So a nice little landing spot for him. But Texas has pinned, or is already looking for big time returner kind of production coming from these guys out of the transfer portal right now. C.J. Daniels is that guy right now. Silas Bolden, the wide receiver out of Oregon State, is who they have coming in this weekend as well. A different type of wide receiver than C.J. Daniels. Bolden's only about 5'8", 5'8.5", 5'9", in that range. Very quick, very fast. He's an electric wide receiver with the ball in his hands. But there is a consistent theme there, and that's that's production. Something that Texas needs out of the wide receiver position immediately in 2024. They don't have a lot of it right now. I think only about 19% of their returning wide receiving stats are coming back for 2024 from the roster this past year. So a lot going on. Texas is also having talks with the former Alabama linebacker Kendrick Blackshear in terms of coming in for a visit as well. He has an Ole Miss visit locked in right now per On3. So a lot going on in the portal. And, of course, depending on what Jahdae Barron does as well, there could be a defensive back movement as well. But for now, everything's set on the defensive line and wide receiver.
Rod, we've talked about it on our show in the morning on the Horn FM and, the receiver position. Sark runs he wants to run the football. He's always had a 1,000-yard rusher, but it's a pass-based offense. And next year, coming back with a third-year starting quarterback in Quinn Ewers, you've got to have quarterback-receiver chemistry. You got to have guys that you can work with. And I think there's a high ceiling for guys like Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore, and Ryan Niblett is another guy that they like a lot at receiver. But you got to have some guys and some, as CJ said, some dudes who have played. And played high level. The kid from Liberty played a lot of football. He's a 22-year-old veteran who had over 1,000 yards this year, 21 yards a catch, 10 touchdowns. C.J. Daniels, and then Silas Bolden, different type of player, kind of a water bug looking dude, kind of reminds you of Kevondre Turpin when he was at TCU. Just small but super fast, returning punts potentially, and also a receiver. As you and I talked about, it wouldn't be. If they could get him, the law wouldn't be beyond the Longhorns to take both of those guys on top of Matthew Golden coming in from Houston.
The Longhorns are obviously losing a lot at wide receiver. You got two players left, being the transfer portal, Isaiah Nayer and Casey Kane, and of course Jay Witt leaving, X-Man, A.D. Mitchell as well, being reported to be declaring for the NFL draft. So you not only need proven commodities. That's what they're trying to bring in with C.J. Daniels potentially. Matthew Golden is more of a proven commodity, but you also need a variety of receivers. That's what I liked about the receiving core this past season, right? You had great variety. You had A.D. Mitchell, your 50-50 guy, who a great red zone threat. touchdown maker. You had Jay Witt, who could almost do a lot of the dirty work, could work the short game, the quick game, your screens, the quick tags on the RPOs. And then you had X-Man. Pretty much you're a number one do-it-all wide receiver. You can change it up, but also could be the speed demon to stretch the field, take the top off of defense. You had a lot of variety with that receiving core. I think Sark likes that ability, has that fluidity, a lot of versatility in the wide receiving core. So it's going to be interesting to see who ends up cracking that circle of trust I talk about. I was talking to Bobby about this. I do think Sark is willing to expand his circle of trust with wide receivers. Here at Texas, it's been a pretty tight rotation. 3 guys, maybe 4 guys. But at Bama, I mean, when he had 4 first-round wide receivers, guys he trusted that had earned that trust, yeah, he ran 10 personnel at times, called it the red package, 4 wide receivers on the field at the same time. Now, they were 4 first-round wide receivers, but they had earned Sark's trust. So I think it ought to be about which one of these wide receivers can earn his trust early on. And I like the fact that, and I think Sark likes the fact that this guy, CJ Daniels, is a 5th-year senior, a lot of experience, productivity. That's what they're looking at in the transfer portal. Anytime there's a guy with just potential in the portal, I don't really see Sark and his team really targeting those guys heavily. I see them targeting players who've already produced just because they were a 5-star coming out of high school, blue chip coming out of high school. I don't think that matters as much coming out of into the transfer portal, because what they want is productivity over potential. And that's what they like, I think, about CJ Daniels, is the fact that guy's already been a 1,000-yard receiver. Matthew Golden, hell, he proved it even against Texas. It's a guy that's proven it on the field. Even if Silas Bolden is the guy that you talk about, if that's the guy to bring it in, at least he's already got it under his belt, a year where he's proven himself as a return guy, as a receiver at Oregon State. So I think that's what they're looking for. It's going to be interesting, man, because the passing game, I don't know if there's a position being hit as hard. Defensive backfield for different reasons, though. Defensive back, not the frontline guys, though. You're losing a lot of your depth at DB. With wide receiver in the passing game, period, including throwing JT in there, you're losing a ton of your frontline target share. All of your elite playmakers are leaving. You got a lot of upside, a lot of potential with those guys behind them, but that's just, right now that's unproven. That's uncertain.
Yeah, well said. And it is interesting. And obviously Silas Bolden and CJ Daniels, totally different types of players, but could be useful. Hey, CJ, when you look at, it reminds me of last year at this time. This was the conversation surrounding running back, right? That with Bijan and Roshan and all those carries, all that production, all that leadership off to the NFL, who was going to fill the void. And, we didn't know at the time that Jonathan Brooks was going to be nearly as good as he became. Now he's the guy who's off to the NFL draft. CJ Baxter, as a freshman, also came in and really filled a role. Jaden Blue emerged late in the year after the Jay Brooks injury. Which receiver currently, not even the portal guys, but of the current on roster guys, the Jonte Cooks, DeAndre Moore, which one do you think has the best chance to become and elevate to become a go-to guy if you had to pick one?
It's got to be Jonte Cook. I mean, he comes in, as highly touted as any wide receiver Texas has landed, since, basically Brew McCoy, who was on campus for no more than a cup of coffee and a insomniac cookie down the road. So he wasn't here too long, but that's that 5-star caliber wide receiver that Texas hasn't necessarily seen a lot of production from, aside from Xavier Worthy. So it's got to be him. He's got to be that guy to take that next step and fill the shoes in which, there's going to be a lot of steps, for him to take. I think there's a lot of room for him to grow into this Texas offense. And I kind of look at it for Steve Sarkisian as a test to go out, find a wide receiver that he liked out of college or out of high school, and now see him grow and develop into his system. Xavier Worthy was that guy, but more so by trial and fire, because Texas needed him immediately his freshman season. Now you can kind of go back and say, all right, we can kind of pick the fruits of our labor. We have Xavier Worthy out here. He was kind of the big attraction, one of the guys that we could point to on our roster at the time and say to all these wide receiver prospects that we were recruiting, hey, you can come be just like him. Well, now it's time. The opportunity is here for those guys that you recruited to be on campus to go be just like Xavier Worthy or A.D. Mitchell or Jordan Whittington. It's time to see that. And so for Chris Jackson and Steve Sarkisian, the big challenge this offseason is to be getting these guys developmentally ready for game time, extended game time at that.
Yeah,
Matthew Golden coming in is great. Whether or not they add Silas Bolden or CJ Daniels or even Dorian Springer, a guy out of Arizona who or USC that we've talked about very briefly in the past as well, That's great. Portal wide receivers are very good for programs, but you have to be able to show that you can develop these high school kids and get them on the field and be, plus wide receivers. Otherwise, that will eventually dry up because other teams will sit back and point around and say, I mean, they have a good offense, but they're never going to throw to the high school kids they recruit. So that's got to be the next step right here for Steve Sarkisian, not only for 2024, but beyond that, because that narrative will become a thing. It became a thing with Lincoln Riley and quarterbacks and wide receivers when he was at OU. Now you're seeing it at USC as well. His quarterbacks that he develops, who's to say Caleb Williams isn't better than what he was as a freshman? Who's to say that his best quarterbacks were guys that he didn't just take out of the portal? There's a mantra there that sticks with certain coaching staffs and positions. And for Sarkisian, with how important his wide receivers are, this is a big year for his wide receivers to take that next step. And it's got to start with Jonte Cook.
Rod Babers, he, great CJ with some great points there. And I was putting a spreadsheet together today of kind of the roster moving forward. And it's safe to say when you see it in black and white, this is Sark's team. Like as you transition out of the guys that are leaving, the guys that have moved off into the portal, this is Sark's. These are all guys Sark and this staff have recruited, which is, you hope is a good thing. That's what you want. You want your roster of guys. But Chris Jackson's the receivers coach, as CJ mentioned. He's kind of handpicked out of the NFL. Sark was patient, waited on him last year for Jacksonville to finish up their playoff run. Early indications are good of what he can be as a coach and a developer of players. But, I think CJ's right. I mean, this is an important, whether it's the portal guys and Matthew Golden and possibly others, Jonte Cook, even a guy like Ryan Wingo coming in as a 5-star kid out of St. Louis, the development of that position, much like we saw with Jonathan Brooks last year, a running back under Tashard Choice, becomes very pivotal in the Longhorns' first season in the SEC.
I agree with you. It's interesting that the wide receiver position has had the most turnover, right, of all the coaches too, right? Andre Coleman, Brendan Marion comes in, he gets hired, and now you have Chris Jackson in there, so they've actually had a lot of turnover. This will be the first time they've had some stability there from year to year with the wide receiver coaching position. And Stark's all about continuity. That's one of the few positions where some stuff out of his control, where you just had a lot of turnover. But getting back to the point, I agree with you. I think this is exactly what the running backs went through last season, and they were great. Jonathan Brooks, that was very little regression in the running game. Tashard Choice proven he's one of the best coaches in the country. So, and I would say this about Sark. Sark works really hands-on with the wide receivers too. I mean, he's really hands-on with that group because of the specificity, right, in the direction and detailed about the route running and the timing of the routes. So it's interesting with that. That's why a group is, like I said, you got to earn his trust with that group because he works so well with them. He's not putting nobody out there in this group of wide receivers that he doesn't believe can consistently make the plays, and also guys who are consistently going to be assignment sound. So if he's observing you in practice, because he works with that group a lot, not dropping balls and, not creating separation and, not seeing the right side adjustments, then you ain't going to play. And the guys who do it really well, they play. And that's why, like I said, that circle is tight. It's only 3 or 4 guys. And that's really been the case for Sark recently as a play caller. And I'm hoping that could expand a little bit. That's mostly on the players. That's not on Sark. Sark only going to play the guys that he likes. And this year is really interesting because, he really liked 12 personnel. He still does. I mean, he says tight end is the second most important position in his offense behind quarterback. But, even when the wide receivers, let's say 2 years ago, when you didn't have an A.D. Mitchell, but all you had was an X-Man and a Jay Witt and an inconsistent Casey Kane, it still was something. He had tight ends that he kind of trusted with the tight ends that he's been bringing in, JT Sanders mostly, but also Gunnar Helm and how Gunnar Helm has played. But interesting to see this year if the wide receivers if they don't develop in time, he doesn't see that progression early enough. What he does, because I don't know if he'll be able to supplement the 12 personnel in there, 1 back, 2 tight ends, the way he did so comfortably when you had a JT Sanders and a Gunnar Helm. Gunnar Helm's still good in there, but now it'll be Juan Davis as that other tight end. If that's the case, I don't know if that gives you the advantage that you think that you once had with a JT and a Gunnar Helm in there. So, personnel is going to be interesting if that wide receiver room doesn't step up and we don't see them have that, as you're talking about, that progression and development overall, then what is Sark going to do to supplement that production? You go more bat sets, you go more 12. That'll be interesting.
Yeah. Well, on this conversation of wide receivers, I actually got a good tweet, and I wanted to, kind of fit this in here real quick, Aaron. I got a good tweet about it this morning because I was talking about how much Texas is losing from the wide receiver, position. It's something that's giving me a little bit of pause when you see these too early top 25s and Texas is up there at 2 or 3. And I'm sitting back thinking that's great. They got they have the offensive line coming back. That's great. But that wide receiving position is a bit of a question mark. It's going to be a big concern. Well, I got a tweet from Coach I think it's Coach Wilson at 619 over on Twitter. He told me, well, the wide receivers elevated the play of Quinn Ewers. Next year, in year 3 of the system for Quinn Ewers, it's going to be his job to elevate the play of the wide receivers. And that absolutely has to be the case in my eyes because you're in year 3 under Steve Sarkisian. You're behind a completely returning offensive line again. It has to be Quinn Ewers who is living up to that number 1 player in the country, billing to say, all right, now here we go. Got to get these wide receivers up to speed, and it starts with me. That's got to be Quinn Ewers' next jump that we see in 2024.
Great point. Totally agree.
Yeah, that's a great point. That really is. And the coach on the tweet. This is that time, right? 3rd-year quarterback, a veteran offensive line, a running game, and a stable of backs that you should be able to lean on. That's a good building block, right? That's kind of what you would want, and hopefully the receivers come along. But to Rod's point, you're not just replacing receiver production, but also JT Sanders, who's the most dynamic tight end that the program has seen in more than a decade, who's a matchup problem and a nightmare. The Juan Davis thing was weird over the weekend that he jumped in the portal and jumped back out. He and Helm are likely your go-to tight ends. While we're on this conversation, we got a great question and super tweet or a question here. Does Wingo start as a freshman, given he's an early enrollee? He's in line to be the Mitchell replacement, not as big, but much faster. CJ, that's a great question for you because you saw Ryan Wingo in person down in San Antonio this past weekend.
Listen, I'll beat the drum until I can't anymore, but starting super young freshman players is not something I'm very fond of. I like getting them into the rotation, but at playmaking positions, it's something that gives me a little bit of pause. With Ryan Wingo, obviously we talked about the raw tools, the physicalness, the speed, the size, everything that you want is there. Can he get up to speed as fast as possible? That's going to be big this spring. If Texas goes out and lands CJ Daniels, I see him as that 3rd wide receiving starter right next to Jonte Cook and Matthew Golden as well. That's not to say Ryan Wingo won't be on the field, but I'm taking the veteran production over Ryan Wingo, the true freshman, anytime I can. But I do think he will see the field. I was very impressed with him down in San Antonio. He was a man amongst boys in terms of creating separation and just being open as often as he could, as often as he was. He was tremendous down there in San Antonio. I think he'll see the field. How much? We'll see after spring football.
Well, Rod, I think it brings us full circle back to the start of this conversation about wide receivers and the Longhorns bringing in as many as maybe at least 2 more receivers or at least trying to, and Silas Bolden and CJ Daniels. You just don't know, right? If you're Sark, you stay up nights thinking, yeah, Ryan Wingo's talented, Jonte Cook's talented. You just don't know how these players, you played the game, Rod. They're playing in the SEC. They're playing Michigan this year. How does a young guy react to the ebbs and flows and the roller coaster of a first year, the physicality of playing high-level college football? And you got to know what you're getting. And that's why in the portal they're looking for dudes that have played and produced and played in high level. Even a guy like CJ Daniels, he played at Liberty, but he played Oregon, had a great game against Oregon. He's played high-level competition. You as a coach and Chris Jackson or Sark know that. They've been there. They've done that. Those guys can come along, but they don't have to come along. It doesn't determine your passing game, essentially, and you want a little of both, I think, if you're a coaching staff, if you can get them.
Yeah, because, those guys who are proven commodities, they give you a little margin for error in developing that position with those young guys. As you pointed out, I mean, with the young guys, they're freshmen, right? So anything can happen. First of all, I'm going to knock on wood here. I got some, but hell, injuries could pop up. I mean, anybody remember when Troy Murray was basically going to be the starting wide receiver as a freshman and coming in training camp, and then injuries popped up, and it was like, what happened to Troy Murray? Well, injuries. That's a lot of football, right? So injuries could be a part of that. Look at CJ Baxter, right? CJ Baxter is a great talent, but he doesn't have that armor yet. So he gets nicked up a lot, right? Because the physicality, the level of play is a little bit more is a little bit higher. And when he gets hit, every now and then he gets nicked up. That's not because, he can't handle the physicality. It's not because he's an injury-prone player. It's because he doesn't have the body armor yet. He hadn't gotten the weight room, not an off-season with the strength and conditioning coaches, nutrition, dietitian, all that kind of stuff. And that's something only what a freshman has to deal with. There's the freshman wall guys hit. Freshmen also have to acclimate and adapt to being a student athlete, right? They also got to go to class. There's NIL obligations. So these guys' head is spinning a little bit as a freshman, in addition to learning all the plays, making sure that you're putting in enough work, the consistent work to be a great player in the weight room, training room, in the film room. I mean, that's a lot of obligations on a young freshman. So I usually agree with CJ. There are prodigies. Because prodigies are prodigies, right? When you have a prodigy in school, what do? You skip them up a grade. Like, hey, man, we got to have this prodigy. We got to challenge them. That'll bring out the best in these prodigies. So when you do have a prodigy, then they need to play early. I'm all about that. Robbie, I wasn't a prodigy. I was a good player. So I probably started 4 games, 3-4 games, something like that as a freshman, right? And then I started as a sophomore. That's usually the track you want. That's what CJ's talking about. Have some time to acclimate, adapt, ease them into that role. Sometimes, man, when you got a prodigy and you need them, if they're good enough, they're old enough. So it all depends. If Ryan Wingo comes in there and he's out there doing Texas starting DBs dirty, all right, you know what? If you're good enough, you're old enough. Let's put him. That was that with Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy went out there and he was dusting Texas DBs. Like, why the hell are we gonna put him on the bench? He's the damn wideout we got, and he's making our starting DBs look bad in practice. That guy's in. He's starting. Yeah. So if Ryan Wingo comes in and he's got that type of performance and he's showcasing that kind of ability, then he's gonna get. I think they'll expedite his development a little bit, and they should.
Kelvin Banks, Anthony Hill, Manny Muhammad, kind of the same thing. And you can and CJ, you can't count on that. But this is something that in any level of football or any organization, you can't count on that. You can't. That's why you want both, right? That's why you want to recruit at a high level, but insurance policies. CJ Daniels, who's played 5 or 4 years of football at Liberty, Silas Bolden. You want those guys available, and maybe next year the receiving core looks a little bit more like the defensive backfield where they rotate a little more. You just don't know. Sark doesn't like to do that. I get it, but at the same time, maybe at least early in the year, you kind of mix and match until you figure out how it plays out. Because as Rod just said, you just don't know. Because Rod, in addition to the more physical thing, you haven't been in the weight room in college football, the nature of college football. There's all those pretty girls too. There's all those pretty girls.
Yes,
and that's a distraction too.
Amen. Oh man, that's the biggest distraction. That distracts you more than the class, or sometimes even more than the film room needs to.
Can I get an amen? Yeah, all those pretty girls, and it's like, wow, this isn't like high school anymore. What is going on over here?
Sometimes y'all like, what happened to that really good player, man? He came in as a 5-star. He's still a 5-star, just with the pretty girls away from the football field. He's distracted.
Amen. Yeah, amen. Yeah, well, you just never know. But that's why I think more the merrier at that position for sure. As the offensive side of the ball is it's a concern without a doubt. I think as you said it, CJ, it's the way too early preseason polls are silly, but they're good conversation starters. But I do like that they're starting with a what should be a high level offensive line, a 3rd-year quarterback, and a running back room that's really deep and adding to it. And now what you got to figure out is the passing game. Who's going to catch those passes from a 3rd-year quarterback? No doubt about it. Let's flip over to the defensive side. You mentioned Jahdae Barron, CJ. What's the latest there? Rod and I have talked about this quite a bit on our morning show. He's the one. I mean, you're waiting on CJ, or CJ, you're waiting on Jahdae Barron to make a call. We kind of know who's moving on. We assumed, CJ, that Jahdae was going to go to the pros. Where are we on this? Because as Rod and I have talked about, Andrew Makuba and he were friends in high school. One went to Austin LBJ, one's at Pflugerville. They're now kind of, when Andrew Makuba came for his visit from Clemson in the portal, it was Jahdae that hosted him. Is there a chance those two want to play together in the secondary? And does Jahdae want to kind of try to improve his draft stock with a secondary that would include Derek Williams and Terrence Brooks and Manny Muhammad, plus these freshmen that are coming in? What's the latest on Jahdae Barron?
Yeah, I would expected probably around mid-year, is almost a guarantee that Jahdae Barron was going to depart for the NFL. As the weeks have gone on and the season has wound down, it's kind of been more of a topic of conversation for Jahdae Barron and his camp, given that he wasn't entirely healthy throughout the duration of the season. I think that is really where some of the pause and really real now consideration is coming from, of just how high of draft stock can you go if you're Jahdae Barron, if you play an entire year fully healthy in the SEC. That's where this is coming from right now. It's nice having Andrew Makuba on campus, obviously, in that secondary. The versatility is going to allow Texas to be, really to be able to do as much as they want with Makuba, with Derek Williams, with Michael Taft, with the two cornerbacks out wide. If Jahdae Barron comes back to that room, there's no telling just how wide open and free that Texas secondary can get. And I think that's very encouraging. I had it at 50-50 that Jahdae comes back over the weekend. Right now, I'm starting to lose a little steam. I'm not ready to say that it's a foregone conclusion that he does depart for the NFL. It's still in consideration. We're still awaiting a true decision before January 15th, the deadline for the NFL draft. But right now, I'm not ready to say that he's leaning one way or the other. I'm just starting to lose, probably down to 45% on terms of coming back for Jahdae Barron. So a little bit of lost steam, not a whole lot, nothing too significant, but that is the case right now. I do think a year coming back for Jahdae would help the draft stock tremendously. Like I said, being fully healthy, there were times this year where Jahdae was picked on just a little bit when going vertically down the field. That's really where teams started picking at him just a little bit. We talked about it against Oklahoma State. Isaiah Bond in Alabama beat him against man coverage week 2, going deep from a slot fade. And then Washington targeting 10 times, 8 receptions. It was one of those games where it just didn't feel like he was there. I would say with the little springiness that we saw at times this year as well. But we know about his football intellect, his IQ. Rod, you talk about it all the time. He came to campus, wanted to become a defensive coordinator down the road. That's how special Jahdae Barron is between the ears. One team will take a chance on him no matter what in the NFL draft. I think the question is, how high can he go, and will the measurables be there for the combine and the pro day?
Yep, that injury, so it can scare a guy either way, right? It can scare him into going, man, I got to start getting paid for these reps. I was injured all year last year. I need to get to the NFL as fast as possible, so that if I am injured and I got to deal with injuries, at least I can do it in the NFL, accomplishing my dream. Or the guys think, oh man, my draft stock is so low because I played all season injured. I need to come back to school to improve my draft stock, because right now I'm not going to get drafted anywhere close to where I projected myself to be. I don't know where that has today. I'm with you. I think Jahdae Barron could come back and definitely increase his draft stock. There's no question. The question will be how much, and is it worth it? Is it worth the risk of coming back and risk of injury? Because if you come back and then you get hurt again, then your draft stock is going to drop even more. Right now, he's going to get drafted. There's no question. And depending on how he runs in the 40-yard dash, they'll determine whether he gets drafted in, 3rd round, or he drops all the way down to the 5th or the 6th round, pretty much. But he's going to get drafted. I just think he's put enough stuff on film. Like you said, CJ, there's some scout out there thinking, oh, man, I love that Jahdae Barron, man. He's a damn good player. If he's around, day 3, we taking him. So I think he's okay in getting drafted-wise. It's just like, does he have a dream of being, a Thorpe Award finalist? Does he have a dream of being, a 2nd-round pick? I don't know if he has those dreams, or if he's saying, no, I'm an NFL player and I believe it. I believe it too, Jahdae. Where a guy gets drafted, that's usually based on, that guy's got to talk to his representatives, and they'll talk to scouts, they'll talk to NFL, connections, and determine, where he is projected to be drafted, and then it'll be on him to make the decision.
Well said about the injury thing can be a double-edged sword. It's man, I was hurt all year, so I didn't get to showcase, but man, what if I come back next year and don't get hurt? I would add in there that's where the NIL thing comes in, right? Especially for a local kid who's from Pflugerville, who knows a lot of people in this area. They know him. There's an opportunity to make a little bread, make a little money while you're here. And Rod, the difference between a 5th-round pick and a 2nd or 3rd-round pick is a lot of money, big picture. Yeah. And you can really develop, and you and I have talked about this, with a buddy like yours, like Andrew Makuba, who's a versatile safety with a lot of experience, with Derek Williams coming back. that can be a very versatile back end in the safety position. If you throw Michael Taff into there, those guys, Makuba and Jade, together with the other two I mentioned, that can be pretty dynamic and maybe a chance to really showcase the versatility that the NFL wants to see, Rod, and try to stay healthy for a year.
Yeah, I would cross train them if I was the secondary coach. If I was Coach Gideon, Coach Joseph, PK in there, I would cross train them. I would, and I'd be able to sell it to them pretty easy. I mean, you've shown the NFL you can play nickel. You've shown the NFL you can play corner. If you can play nickel, you can play corner. I mean, that just goes without saying. Not all outside corners can play nickel, but if you can play nickel, you can play corner on the outside. Trust me, it's easier. It's tougher to play that nickel spot with the guys with a two-way go. The question is, can you play safety? And I think he can. I remember reading a quote from Gary Patterson from my man Chip Brown back in the day that said Gary Patterson, oh yeah, he definitely could play safety. And at times, and you saw this, CJ, because you mentioned it, when formationally teams challenge Texas, oftentimes like formation in the boundary, depending on the formation and strength of the formation, there are times where Jahdae Barron ends up playing field safety anyway because he doesn't travel in certain situations. We end up playing a field safety anyway, and you saw that more and more later in the season when teams started to try to manipulate Texas matchup-wise with different formations and like formation of boundary 3-by-1 sets. So I think he should come back and cross-trade him, and I would move him around based on the matchups week to week. I know you want guys to get comfortable. I think he's the exception. I think he'd be comfortable anyway. I think he's comfortable at corner, comfortable at nickel. I think he'd be comfortable at safety as long as all week long we're practicing for that specific role that he's going to play based on the team we're going to play, the matchup, all that stuff. I'd move him around and make him a whole lot of money. I say, man, I'll put on film that you're the most versatile DB in the country, and you got the football IQ to prove it. And that's why I'll sell it to him to come back. Come back, man. We'll get you in the Thorpe conversation just on versatility alone. We'll start putting out all the pro football focused numbers about how you move around. You're the ultimate chess piece for Texas. He's everywhere, man. You got to find your day. It's like, where's Waldo? Blah, blah, blah. Man, we'll sell it. I can sell that. To me, it's just about the sales pitch. Can they sell it to today with the NIL? As you mentioned, he's got to be the NIL, got to be in there too. Now it's got to be a part of the package. But I think I can sell it to him to come back if they cross-trained him. Now, maybe he don't want to be cross-trained. Maybe he's like, no, I don't want to do that. Well, whatever he wants, you probably should be open to doing. Like if he's coming back saying, hey, I want to do this, then you should be like, all right, you know what? Let's see if we can move some things around. If all you want to do is play nickel, all you want to do is play corner, then let's see if we can figure that out for Jahdae, because I think he is that much of a difference maker. You bring him back, that secondary to me is not going to be a liability. It possibly could be a strength. If you put Makuba in that secondary with Jahdae Barron, with a young Derek Williams, then you're talking about all coverage specialists at your safety nickel positions and all guys who can play safety and nickel, making them interchangeable so that teams cannot hunt matchups for your, matchup advantages in coverage at the safety position to me. And then that would essentially make you more malleable, able to solve more problems that the offense will present to you, because all of your three, essentially, I would call them three safeties, but they wouldn't. But those three defenders would be interchangeable. So teams would try to decide, oh man, we're going to hunt, we're going to try to pick on this safety. Well, no, that safety's a nickel. He can come down and play coverage if we need him to. And all of our safeties would be like that. If you look at the recruiting class, it seems like that's the way they're going anyway.
Yeah.
Hey, to your point, Rod, Jabril Peppers. Remember his time at Michigan and how often we would see the tweets and the stats and the graphics of, box, corner, safety, field, edge even. I'm not saying Jahdae is going to line up at defensive end every now and then, but that's exactly the hype that was surrounding Jabril Peppers at the time. So I see it. I see the vision 100%.
That's a good example, CJ.
Jabril Peppers ended up like a Heisman candidate at some point for Michigan that year.
He also returned punts. He was a pretty good athlete.
The power of marketing. Hey, listen, tonight's live stream, we wanted to tell you about these. This is the power of marketing as well, but we appreciate them. The Tuesday live stream every week brought to you by Energy Texas. Energy Texas is for Texans by Texans. When Energy Texas becomes your energy provider, you're dealing with and calling people in the state of Texas, not back east, not overseas. Texans, they're proud to be from the great state and the greatest state in the union, prouder to be fighting for the little guy against big power. It's Energy Texas who presents the On Texas Football Tuesday live stream. Aaron Hogan, CJ Vogel, Rod Babers. Thank you, Energy Texas. All right, guys, stay on defense. That's great stuff on Jade, and we'll wait and see. If you're just tuning in, CJ mentioned that over the weekend thought it was 50-50 for Jade staying. Now maybe not as confident, but maybe he's listening and heard Rod Babers selling the pitch. Let's sell that pitch, man. Let's get that out there. It'll be like Mad Men. Let's get that out there to Jade, because I would love to watch this secondary. And again, as someone who has covered sports in Austin for 25 or 30 years, I would love to see Andrew Makuba and Jade Barron in the back end and just working together. That would be a lot of fun. It'd be like harking back to days of you, Rod, when you're back there with your dudes, Ahmad Brooks and those great secondaries of the past that I so much enjoyed covering. They were so darn good. Nathan Vasher and you and Ahmad Brooks, just really good players.
Yeah.
But working together. And you talked about how with the synergy you had with those guys, you guys played together, worked together so long that you communicated non-verbally. You guys knew what you were doing. You knew what he was doing because you've seen him do it a million times.
Yeah, Coach Akina, we call it the hive mind. You guys gotta be hive-minded out there. Hey, I think I got hive, man. Hive-minded. So everybody's seeing the same things and we're thinking the same things based on what we're seeing. And you're right. I mean, it helps when you're good friends. We talked about this when Texas was rotating a lot of guys on defense. There are advantages to doing that, being fresher in the fourth quarter, getting reps for a lot of guys. So when your frontline guys get hurt, hey, the backups, they're already seasoned a little bit, right? They got some experience. They won't be shell-shocked by the experience of being a starter for the first time. But there are also some disadvantages, and I think one of them is you just don't have the continuity and the chemistry when you don't have those reps together. When you play with guys for, the entire season with most of those reps, 85, 90% of those reps, and you do that over multiple seasons, and you guys are friends. That's what you're talking about, is that, Makuba and Jade Barron, they be hanging out. They be doing all that work at continuity and chemistry at practice, in the film room, in meeting room, probably strength and conditioning at the workouts. And then they probably go hang out and kick it. All right. And go to dinner and still talk ball, and go to the dorm room and kick it and still talk ball there. That's what was happening with our team. That's what's happening with this past team. I talked to Jaylan Ford about that. This team they had think tank sessions away from the facilities. That's how you're heading in the right direction with your culture. So you're right. I think if you have those guys in the second who've already played. Terrence Brooks played 1 year. Manny Muhammad was basically starting toward the end of the year. Jade Barron's a seasoned vet at this point, man. He's seen damn near everything you can see on a football field. Then you got Makuba, who started 3 years at Clemson. And then you'd have a young Derek Williams, but still last year got some quality reps last season. You'd have so much more experience. And I think those guys playing together, if they weren't rotating as much, I still think you want to rotate, but I think you need to start letting your frontline guys play more like 80, 75% of those reps. So I think continuity and chemistry together, I think in a secondary, I think the O-line is the only group that works better as a hive, if you will, hive-minded, than the defensive backfield. And I think they're the only ones that's more important in terms of their chemistry and continuity as a group than the DBs. Because DBs, essentially, if you're watching at all 22, man, DBs, they should all be kind of working on strings. You should almost be able to see the way that the coverage develops naturally. And I think with Texas, you start seeing a little bit of that later on in the season, not in the Washington game, but I'm talking about in the Tech game and at Oklahoma State game. I started to see some of that. I talked about how Texas coverage was a lot better. Those are the two best coverage games of the year. Was the last two of the year. Now, when they faced the best quarterback and the most sophisticated passing game and 3 NFL wide receivers, that went all out the window. But there was improvement in that secondary, and I think it was when those young guys the lights started to go off for them.
Yeah, they're clearly changing the mindset and the philosophy of what type of player they want back there. But you told me this, Rod, that when you guys would come off the field, you guys would talk before you even talked to Coach Keenan. Like you guys would say, what'd you see there? What was that? What was going on here? I saw this, you saw that. And then Coach Keenan would come in and talk to you guys about it. I think that's the kind of stuff you're looking for. And that's the culture that where Texas is. Hey, CJ, what about up front? We talked at the top about the defensive tackle from Houston. They're, in addition to the receiver room and the DB room, which is, overhauling and really transitioning defensive tackle as well. Where are we with the youngster out of Houston? 325 pounder, more of a Byron Murphy than a Tavondre Sweat, I think, but at the same time had 2 sacks against Texas, very active on the interior. Where does that stand?
Yeah, not many guys fit into that T'Vondre Sweat 365, 369-pound role, like you said. So, but hey, being Byron Murphy's not half bad either. And we're going to see just how early his name gets called off the board. But Jamari Caldwell is going to be down to Texas and Oregon right now for his decision, as Bobby mentioned this morning on Coffee and Football. Texas did a good job hosting him for the one-day visit this weekend here in Austin. He actually stayed overnight very briefly. But Texas, again, is pitching the blatant need and desire for him to get on the field very early whenever he arrives down here in Austin, should he pick the Longhorns. And obviously, moving into the SEC, competing at the highest level, going against the best competition in the entire country is only going to help a draft stock that is already in consideration to be pretty solid at the moment. 6.5 sacks. You don't normally talk about defensive tackles getting after the quarterback that often. He did a good job at it. Clearly, Texas is aware of how well he can rush the passer. As you mentioned, Aaron had 2 sacks against the Longhorns this season, but more of a true run fitter. Stopping the run is what he does. That's what Texas needs, having lost the T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. He's, a guy that fits an immediate hole. So I think, the pitch is clear. The necessity is there. It's now up to Texas to win out behind the scenes for Jamari Caldwell.
Yeah. What about David Benda? We'll get into the Aggie conversation. That's a great question by Sandman. But real quick, and then we'll get to the questions on the message line. CJ, David Benda is a name that's interesting. People have kind of forgotten about him. He's available and able to come back and really be a veteran presence on that linebacker room that features a lot of young guys with a new linebackers coach in Coach Johnny Nansen. What's the latest on David Benda?
Yeah, I actually thought David Benda carved out a pretty nice niche role for him in this defense toward the second half of the year. Obviously, he was very impactful against Alabama as well early on. Right now, there's kind of a waiting decision similar to what we are currently seeing from Jahdae Barron right now with David Benda. Right now, I believe he will return to Texas. I do think he will come back for 2024. There's obviously been some rumors and murmurs that he might follow Coach Choate out to Nevada as well. So that's something to monitor, as well as a potential NFL departure is in the cards as well. So a three-way go, a true three-way for David Benda right now. Texas would gladly have him back. They need linebacker depth. There's actually a reason, one of the reasons why Kendrick Blackshear, the former Alabama linebacker, is in conversations to visit Texas as well this year or this upcoming weekend. But if Benda comes back, I actually don't know how much of a need Blackshear becomes, because there's play styles have I would say a varying degree of approach to the linebacker position. So Benda obviously is up to him to come back. I do think he does return for 2024.
Wow, good stuff right there. And one other note on the defensive side, Johnny Nansen's the new linebackers coach. And Rod, there are conversations, I've been told, between Dwayne Aquina and Texas and CDC and Sark and the staff. I don't know if you've reached out to Coach Aquina or not, but I have been told that there have been conversations. For folks who don't know, Johnny Nansen was the defensive coordinator at Arizona. On that staff, Dwayne Aquina was a consultant / defensive advisor. And there's some thought that maybe he could move back to Austin and be a part of that in this role. There's no hard reporting on that, but I have been told there are conversations being had because of the relationship with Austin and the relationship with Coach Nansen. That obviously would be a big development for Texas football if Coach Dwayne Aquina were to return in whatever capacity that would be.
Yeah, it makes too much sense, right? Coach Aquina, one of the godfathers of DBU, taught me everything I pretty much know about playing defensive back at a really high level. Coach Gideon, safeties coach, also played football under Coach Aquina, so he's well aware of Coach Aquina, has a great relationship with him. You just talked about Coach Nansen and their relationship going back to Arizona last season, and Coach Aquina's love for the city of Austin. A lot of folks in this community, they know Coach Aquina really well, know his family really well. Family ties to Austin, also just a genuine love for the community of Austin. So it just seems like it makes too much sense. Why would you stay analyst at Arizona when the defensive coordinator is leaving, play caller? Why not either follow him, which is going to a familiar place? So I haven't talked to Coach Aquina. I planned on letting things kind of settle down and reach out to him. I was hoping that the news would break before I even got a chance to reach out to him. That has not happened. But I do know for a fact that he was interested potentially in coming to Austin when Sark originally got the gig and was building his staff. So, even though that was obviously when he was coaching, now as an analyst, it'd be a different responsibility. But I think actually it may fit Coach Akina's personality a little bit better right now as an analyst, because I think he's at a point in his life where I'm not sure he wants to be coaching, but I know he wants to be around the game. I know he loves being around, young athletes and, obviously young football players. I know he likes to be around them to help inspire them. And Texas has pass defense issues. They got secondary issues. That's why you pretty much lost the game versus Washington. And that guy knows how to fix secondary issues. You're trying to go into a more versatile era of your secondary development. That guy knows how to train a 5-tool DB. I was here when he did it. So I don't know. It just makes too much sense. If it doesn't happen, it would be a disappointment. And someone would have to give me a reason why. And maybe it's Coach Aquino who just doesn't want to do it, or maybe it's Texas who, they just couldn't meet on money, whatever it may be. But it makes too much sense right now.
Yeah, it does. And I know Longhorn fans will be fired up for Coach Aquina. And he's 67 years old now, for folks who haven't looked it up, to that stage of his life where just coaching the game, coaching ball, being around kids. Gary Patterson talked about that, and he's 60 in his early 60s, that getting away from being the CEO of TCU football and just getting back to being around young people, running the early strength and development sessions, talking to kids, developing kids. That's at the end of the day, CJ, that's what coaches love, right? That's what they got in it for. Sometimes you can lose focus on that as you're building your career. But at that stage of his life, Dwayne Aquina, almost, 60, late 60s, what a role that could be to be back in Austin, Texas, potentially. Have you heard anything on the Coach Aquina side of things?
I've nothing as much as you guys have, but like Rod said, I mean, how big would it be for the Texas football program to see him back in burnt orange? It would be tremendous. I think it would be one of those things where he would just get ducks in a line and there wouldn't be anything out of order, that you would see any funny business. You wouldn't see any type of, I don't say uncharacteristic, undisciplined football, anything along the lines of that. He's going to get that right. Aquina, I mean, having grown up at the time in which he had everything growing, he was kind of the legend that behind the scenes that had this wheel turning that was called DBU. And so should he be a potential return in an analyst role, in an on-field role, whatever it might be, I would like to see it, because I know, having grown up, that was the guy that I looked at saying, yeah, he was the magic man. He made these guys, first and second round picks year in and year out, regardless of who was back there. So I would love to have him just in the building as a voice to bounce off ideas. And, as much as Gary Patterson was there to talk about defensive backs, which is really kind of the strength and one of the big things that made Gary Patterson as I don't want to say infamous, but he's one of the best defensive back-minded coaches in the Big 12 for a reason. That's why, his impact and fingerprints on the Texas defense was evidenced in 2022 when he was here for his 1 year. I would like to see that a little bit with Aquina as well.
Yeah, and let's remember, Pete Kwiatkowski, and Rod, you've talked about this and broken it down on our show on the Horn, and certainly here on Texas Football. This secondary and the defense is the last phase of the roster construction for Texas, right? Started with the big humans, the quarterback room, the speed that they had to have at receiver, running back room's been developed, and then obviously the holdovers from the Tom Herman era have helped to really develop and lead them to the Big 12 championship this past year and a trip to the CFP. But Pete Kwiatkowski, when he got here, he's known for running that 2-4-5 defense, right? When he was in Washington, two big, sturdy defensive tackles to hold the point, and then the four linebackers. But obviously, they're hybrid players. They're either edge coming off for rushing, they can cover where they need to, but they're kind of hybrid players on the edges with linebackers that can cover and stuff the run, and then 5 defensive backs. I mean, that's you kind of feel like as you watch them recruit now, as they construct the roster, that's where Pete Kwiatkowski would like to get it, to where the defensive backfield's being molded into what you guys have talked about, and Dwayne Aquina would be a huge asset there. Last year in the recruiting class of 2022, if I get my numbers right here, or 2023, it was very heavy linebackers. CJ, you know this, right? I mean, linebackers were huge, where they brought, Anthony Hill was the 5-star linebacker, and Darian Gillette and Samaje Burrell and Leona Lafau and all these guys that, so now you bring – and the edge players with Colton Vasek and Ethan Burke, and here comes Colin Simmons. So you kind of see where they're going. They want 2 big point-of-attack tackles, and then they want versatile hybrid and something you like, Rod, a lot, positionless football guys that can do a lot of different things at that second level. And then in the back end, you want, 5-tool DBs who can disguise and cover and run and support all those things. You kind of see where this is going if you're kind of an architect, seeing what PK is doing to match what Sark is doing on the offensive side. Am I wrong about that?
No, my man, he hit the nail on the head. It's exactly what they're doing. It's just, and you only have so many acquisition cycles to acquire talent, and Sark being an offensive guy, he prioritized the offense, which makes perfect sense. I mean, you could pick a phase, you can pick offense or defense, but he picked offense, and they did a great job of building the offense. And the key is you want to start building kind of a pipeline, right? Because you anticipate guys performing at a high level and leaving. And so once it's all, Tom Herman had a great quote about, building the offensive line and constructing the offensive line. You treat it like the Golden Gate Bridge, kind of like by the time you're done repainting the Golden Gate Bridge, you got to start all over again. All right. And I think he was talking about compared to O-line, facilities, different things. But I think that's how you have to approach roster construction overall, period. By the time you're done building a position, you got to come back around to it. Like, 2 or 3 acquisition cycles later. After you really address it, after you infuse it with a lot of young talent. Did that on the O-line. The O-line is good for a while because you had a lot of veterans also coming back. And they actually did it with wide receiver. Recently, they're starting to do it because I think they realize they're going to lose all those wide receivers. So they're going to start to rebuild that as well. Because we got an announcement here.
There it is. Look at Matt.
We got some news
on it. David Benda. Making you prophetic, CJ. You think he thought he was coming back? I will be returning to UT. David Benda with a nice letter and note, well written. It looks like right there, and that's pretty awesome. David Benda will be back to help anchor that defensive linebacker position. Big. That's good. That's big time. But 6th-year player has gotten better and better as the years have gone on, and really carved out a nice role. Nice job, CJ. Good call, Rod. And finish that thought on. Building the. We see where it's going. They want, you're a football theorist, Rod. What does that mean to you when you're talking about, you want the sturdiness in the middle on the interior, and we've seen that. But then, positionless football type players on the edges and the linebacker, and then, same thing in the defensive backfield, which makes you multiple. We saw it with Michigan last night. I thought. I mean, Michigan. They got a lot of guys that can cover, they can run, they can disguise. They all look the same, right? At the end of the day, a lot of those guys look like the other guy, and that makes you very difficult to move the football against.
Yeah, I mean, Sark, they're going to build this defense on certain principles and traits, and speed's going to be one of them. Versatility is going to be another one of them. Coverage, and then they want to be able to rush the passer. Sark wants to play man-to-man. When you play man-to-man, you don't really hide it. Everybody knows what you're doing. You're playing man coverage, and you assume your guys are better than theirs, and you're going to win that one-on-one matchup. So it's something that it's a luxury that Texas can afford, where they can just recruit the best guys, the best players at the top positions, develop those players into being high-level, elite, all-conference, NFL draftable players, and then you can recruit certain traits and turn those into almost foundational like principles that your defense is built on. I think Texas wants to be built on speed. They didn't have enough speed in the back end this year. That was pretty obvious. They need more speed. So they're recruiting speed. They're recruiting versatility because I think they want guys who make their defense malleable. Being positionless, it gives you the ability to solve more problems. Rigidity, that's what gets you in trouble in football. When you're too rigid, you only got one way to do things. You want multiple ways to do it. So it's pretty obvious where the defense is going. They're ahead of schedule. They went to the college football playoff. That's great. But when you're ahead of schedule, it also means you're going to have some holes in your roster. The holes in your roster is because you haven't fully addressed every phase and every position in roster construction because you just haven't had enough time to do it. This cycle was your defensive back cycle. If they had been on a different track and they weren't ahead of schedule next season or 2 seasons from now, then Texas probably would have fewer holes to be exposed against a team like Washington or whoever the high-level opponent they were playing in the college football playoff. That's what happens, though. the better opponents you play, the more they're going to expose those very few holes. That's why a team like Michigan has been building that roster for 9 years, right? They ain't got a lot of holes on their roster. They ain't got a lot of holes. All right, they addressed them all. That's what kept them from winning the college football playoff the last 2-3 years, because they had a few holes on their roster that just need to be addressed. Once they got everything tweaked and they had stacked so many cycles of talent, then they don't have holes. They got tons of talented depth. Doesn't matter if somebody gets hurt. It's not going to determine their season one way or the other, because they got great players, 5-star players right behind those guys too. And the same thing can be said of teams like Georgia, right? It took Georgia a little while just because they had to address the holes in their roster. Now, Washington was a great team this year, but Washington had a ton of holes on their roster, lots of them actually. But they had such a great quarterback performance, which they didn't in that game, right, all season long. And their offense was so potent and prolific that it was able to mask a lot of the holes they had on their roster, right? They didn't even have a 5-star player on their roster. They had more 3 stars, and Texas had 4 stars on their roster. It's a different type of roster construction over there overall. So it's just going to take Texas a while. I mean, it's no shame in that, and I'm not being critical of it. My point is actually that Texas didn't have a chance to address all the different phases and all the different positions, because they just haven't been here long enough. and now I think you're starting to see them. They've tapped into like every position has been infused with young talent, but young talent has been identified specifically for their systems. Almost every position now has start guys, all right, or PK guys in it now. We're talking about the defensive line, defensive front. We're talking about linebacker, second level, central nervous system, safety, corner. You got your guys in there now. So I think that's when they'll start now. You'll start seeing that defense philosophically start looking more and more like that PK defense you were talking about.
Yeah, from Washington, and with better athletes even, and higher level 4 and 5-star kind of players that include Anthony Hill and Colin Simmons and Manny Muhammad and Derek Williams. I mean, these kind of difference maker players. That's the exciting part for Texas. And CJ, that's kind of a narrative that Rod and I have talked about a lot. Longhorn fans, and all fan bases do this. You watch the Michigan team and be like, damn, they're really good. Why can't we be like that? Well, it took 9 years. I mean, Jim Harbaugh went 0 for 6 in his first 6 tries against Ohio State, and they wanted to run him out of the building, and he was gone. He had to take a pay cut and kind of prove himself as a Michigan man. And he got it right. And here they are with, as Rod said, with very few holes on the roster, one of the deepest teams in college football. Georgia was the same thing for each of the past 2 years, with just, they weren't, their quarterback was Stetson Bennett, like J.J. McCarthy. It was just so talented, so deep, just so many good players. And that's where you want to get. Texas fans and fan bases will also compare it to TCU of last year or Washington this year. And they're not the same. I think if it was a fan base, CJ, or at least an observer, you're just happy where Sark has got it. I mean, as Rod is pointing out, you only feel so many things so often, but now you're number 3 in the country to finish the year. You won the Big 12 championship. You couldn't be more confident about how you're entering the SEC. Go back to when the Longhorns were announced they're going to the SEC. Oh my gosh, we're not ready for that. What are we doing? We're not ready for that. Well, now here they are heading into the SEC in 2024, and it feels like they're pretty ready to not go dominate by any stretch, but they're ready to handle what's coming over the next 12 games of 2024.
Yeah, that saying of comparing yourself to one another only brings down the happiness of everybody, or whatever it is. I'm not a guy for euphemisms or cliche sayings like that, but you get what I'm saying. And
yeah,
for Texas fans specifically, I think it's very important to look only within, because for the last 15 years, this is a place where Texas has not even been close to sniffing.
Yeah,
you have that one Sugar Bowl win against Georgia. You won 10 games, and then what? You kind of fall back down the valley. You fire another head coach. Sarkisian comes, it's not pretty. Then you start seeing, some churning, some smoke puffing from the engine. The caboose starts moving down the tracks a little bit. But you see, the pieces start coming together to now where Texas just finished number 3 in the AP poll. They finished to the eventual runner-up in the National College Football Playoff. Right now, I think you mentioned it perfectly. There's no better place that you would rather have Texas when entering a brand new conference, which is considered to be, by a pretty large margin, the best football conference, most competitive football conference in the entire country. So for Texas specifically, it's not one of those things that you can look around and say, how are we matching up with Auburn or with Alabama and Georgia and Michigan? It's, hey, we're doing this pretty good, and we're doing this by the way that we want to do this. The staff has a plan, and they're figuring it out. Rod, you talked about figuring out pieces that they need to address year in and year out. One year was edges, they got edges. This year they need secondary pieces. They went out and they got secondary pieces. Who could forget the offensive line and how bad that was?
Yeah, it's bad.
This group got here.
When they first got here, yeah.
Now Texas is kind of in a conversation to be amongst the deepest offensive lines for 2024 for the second consecutive year, no less. Like, that's how quick of a turnaround it's been. This staff gets it. So I'm 100% there. They understand what it takes to win at the University of Texas. They understand what it's like to win at the highest level in all of college football. And now they're putting the pieces where they have to be to fit, the winning formula. And I'm all for it. I think Texas is in a great spot right now going into the SEC. And I mean, it certainly helps having the transfer portal and some NIL backing to help get those pieces to bridge the gap from the youngsters coming in the recruiting classes to eventually getting on the field at, a place like Jordan Hare or Bryant Denny or the Swamp. So I'm all for it. It's going to be an exciting 2024 season ahead of us.
No, you're right about that. And, we live in a fishbowl here in Austin and Central Texas. I know people on Texas football are everywhere, but, Alabama's dealing with the same issues of trying to fill holes and deal with the portal and, guys to the draft and, who's here and who's there. And Georgia's dealing with the same thing. And that's the good thing. I think when we get to July and, the first ever SEC Media Days, the Longhorns will be picked among the top 3 or 4 teams in the SEC. And I don't think we would have said that a couple of years ago, I think, is the overall thought, because they were playing more along the lines of an Auburn or somebody along those lines. Now they're playing, at least this year, and looking forward into the upper echelon. Hey, somebody put a great message and a good question out there that Matthew flashed up. Will Jim Harbaugh be the coach at Michigan on September 7th of this year? I think at least Rod and I know, I have talked about this on our show. No. I'll ask y'all this, and I'll even ask the audience, who will be the coach of Michigan on September 7th of 2024? Who will be on the sidelines at Michigan when Texas heads to Ann Arbor, second week of the year? Is there a good guess? Is there a betting favorite? Because I think we would all agree it's not going to be Jim Harbaugh, but you all can disagree.
If it's not Harbaugh, look for Brian Kelly out there at LSU. That's a name to make a return back up to the Midwest. I think that makes a lot of sense. And we talked about LSU being the big winner from the A&M firing of Jimbo Fisher. What happens there? Because that was a lot of kids Texas was in after.
Yeah, that's a domino that would be massive if Jim Harbaugh, which a lot of, and do we all agree he's going to be in the NFL somewhere as of the next 3-4 weeks?
I think that's the most likely. There's just too many jobs with already too much reported interest that are wanting to quote unquote break the bank and go full court press on Harbaugh. It just makes sense. The Raiders, the Chargers. It feels like he's been linked to NFL jobs too often in the past. Plus, there's no more telling how many more NCAA violations or inquiries might pop up over the next couple of months anyway. So it seems like I think it's time.
Yeah, and plus, Rod, as we've talked about, he's 60 years old. If he inks a new mega deal with Michigan, that's probably it for him. He's going to stay at Michigan. At 60, you can kind of do the Pete Carroll thing and jump back into the NFL and make a run at it. And as you said to me this morning, I thought it was really poignant. How often do you get a chance to be the man that everyone's coming after, Rod, in pro football? You got 4 or 5 teams, 4 or 5 billionaires who want you. That's pretty good.
That's really good. Well, and he's got a chance to be a made man, right? Not many coaches can say they've won a national title and also a Super Bowl. He talked about, sitting at the big dogs table, right? His dad has won a national title. His brother's won a Super Bowl. I think it matters to him to be a made man at every level of football. And I think he can do it. I mean, he's a hell of a coach. Had a chance to win a Super Bowl, and his brother is snatched it away from him. I think if he gets with the right situation too, He has a really good chance to be one of the 3 coaches now that have won a national title and a Super Bowl. I know Barry Switzer gets credit for it, but he probably shouldn't. But he's a guy that can build a champion. He showed he can build a champion at Michigan. Hell, he was close to building a champion with the 49ers and doing it with a quarterback and most of y'all hate in Colin Kaepernick, and y'all say is trash and can't play. So give him even more credit if he is indeed trash and can't play, that he got him damn near to a Super Bowl and almost won it with Colin Kaepernick. Yeah, man, he can build. So I think he can, if he gets in the right situation, watch out, Lee, because I think you give him a 5-year window, there's a good chance he'll have a team that's a Super Bowl contender in that time span.
Yeah, and one of the things that for Michigan, to who's going to be the coach on September 7th, let me just give some flowers, because I'm for folks who don't know, I grew up, first 8 years of my life were in Akron, Ohio, Northeast Ohio. So that Michigan was always that team up north. I mean, that I wasn't allowed to say the name growing up with my dad and my parents. No, not it was not allowed. So it's hard for me to say good things about that school. But he did a hell of a job. And when you consider that Michigan this year went 15-0, won the national championship by 20-plus points, and for the year, Rod, we talked about this morning, committed 5 total offensive turnovers all year.
Amazing.
5.
That's
5.
crazy.
They had 45 total offensive penalties in 15 games. And they led according to Pro Football Focus, they were the best tackling team in all of college football. Missed the fewest tackles per tackle. I mean, and that's why the NFL is coming after him. They know he can coach. They know he can develop, and was in a Super Bowl with the 49ers. That's as deep and as well coached a team as we've seen. It's, Georgia was similar with Kirby Smart. And there's also talk that Kirby Smart might be looking at the NFL. Speaking of dominoes falling, that Arthur Blank did not fire Arthur Smith to hire the coordinator. That's one of the, I read a great story today in the Atlanta paper that, Arthur Blank, the, Home Depot billionaire, did not fire Arthur Smith to go hire a coordinator, an up and comer. He's going to swing big for a Harbaugh or a Kirby Smart or someone that's got skins on the wall.
Trade for Belichick. You might trade for Belichick.
That name was mentioned too in that same story. Yeah. That Belichick, we're not doing this to go hire, Ben Johnson from the Lions. Nothing against him, or Bobby Slowick from the Texans. We're not going with an unknown. We're going to go bring in a proven commodity. We've got a good team. We need a quarterback and we need a coach. So yes, I think there's a lot to be, hashed out here in the next several weeks. Keep an eye on Atlanta. There's a new ownership group in Washington with the Commanders. That's a billionaire that wants to make a splash. Obviously the Chargers, the Raiders. The Raiders have Tom Brady as a part owner of that team that is a Michigan man himself now. He would like to probably bring Jim Harbaugh to the Vegas, which would be sexy. So, yeah, a lot to look at. The Bears right there, not far away, with all that draft capital and the ability to trade Justin Fields for more. So it'll be interesting to see college football into the pros. It's going to be fascinating. I'll say this, Rod, who do you think will be the coach in Ann Arbor on September the 7th? Do you have a guess? My friend Mike Craven at Dave Campbell's Texas Football told me today he thinks it's going to be Sharon Moore, the offensive coordinator, who he thinks that Jim Harbaugh is going to lobby for. He was the coach who stepped in when Harbaugh was suspended for 6 games this year and won all 6. Is there a chance that they could just promote from within and try to keep the continuity, or do you think they go big picture like Brian Kelly? And this matters because Longhorns are going to play at Ann Arbor in about 8 months.
I would just say it won't be Jim Harbaugh. I'll say that with some certainty. It won't be him. That's a great point. I mean, if that job comes open, Brian Kelly's going to be considered, but I mean, they're going to swing for the fences, and why wouldn't they? I mean, they could definitely poach a big time coach. We saw USC do it. They got that kind of brand power and recognition where, man, every big time college football program with a good coach should be looking at the buyout clause if Michigan comes open, because they got that kind of power as a brand.
Yeah. Winning this program by wins total all time, now a national championship. Their first outright championship since the late 40s, but they bring it home. And Kalen DeBoer is a name, too, that was mentioned.
Yeah.
Kalen DeBoer out of Washington. Obviously, they just beat them in the Natty, but he's a riser who's a young coach who could come in and be a part of that. Hey, guys, great stuff. Matt, any other questions that anybody has on a chat or a super chat? We appreciate getting them. This says, so when is Texas going to block the state and stop Ohio State from needing to come in and take top talent? I appreciate that super chat right there, guys. CJ, I mean, I'll just say this, and then you guys can answer. You only get 25 a year. So Texas has 400 plus D1 prospects a year, so you can't get them all. Am I right about that or wrong about that?
Absolutely. I do think, though, Ryan Day in Texas is drying up just a little bit. Might not look like that with the recent addition of Devin Sanchez. But I would actually be a little bit surprised if that one's stuck all the way through signing day next year, up until December. There's a long way to go. Obviously, a lot of noise right now with Ryan Day not having, necessarily toppled his biggest rival since taking over the head coaching job at Ohio State. I don't know if this will be his last year, but if Michigan does move on from – if Jim Harbaugh does leave Michigan – and Michigan still finds a way to beat Ohio State, look for that seat to get mighty hot, mighty fast this year, because there's a lot of unhappy campers right now up there in Columbus. So I don't know just how much of a footprint Ryan Day will have in Texas moving forward, but I do know with the recent success that Ohio State has had on a national stage, it's going to be tough. I mean, they're going to have their hands in the cookie jars and just every state, that produces talent in the country.
Yeah, there's no more Mack Brown where Mack Brown was the last coach to rule the Iron Throne, as I call it, where he got all the top talent in the state of Texas and everybody else just got their leftovers. And that he pretty much ruled the Iron Throne. He did it for a long time. And when Mack lost power was when Mack lost the ability to walk into a living room and say, Texas is the best football program in the state. Period. We win the most games. We got the best talent. We got the best facilities. And at one point, he couldn't say that. He couldn't say we're the best football program in the state. Texas lost that ability. And when he lost that ability to walk into a living room and say that, and other programs could say it, like Baylor's or U of H could say it, for God's sakes. You had when that happened, that's when everything kind of went off the rails. And Mack, he lost the Iron Throne. And when he lost the Iron Throne, all of these different programs in the state of Texas, they had the ability to compete. Remember, Texas never used to get in competing recruiting battles with Baylor's and TCU's, never. But they started to at one point. And I don't think any coach will ever rule the Iron Throne of Texas again, where they can dominate the recruiting and everybody else gets their leftovers, because now you have too many schools who have influence in the state, especially through the SEC. All right, because that gate's wide open right through H-Town, right through Southeast Texas. Boom. It's nothing you can do about it. And as CJ mentioned, Ohio State's brand is too big. Even when Marcus Freeman, watch out for Notre Dame. My best friend from high school, Jerome Sapp, went to Notre Dame out of Houston Lamar the year that I came out. And Notre Dame hadn't had as much influence in the state since then. And I talked to Notre Dame insiders 2 years ago who told me when Marcus Freeman first took over a couple years ago and said, no, he's coming to Texas. He's coming to Texas. And what has he done? He's come to Texas. So you're never going to stop that again. I think Sark understands there are several pockets that you have to have market share of in Texas. Dallas, DFW, because no metro area produces more NFL draftable talent than DFW, except for Atlanta's metro area, right? DFW is number 2 in the country. Houston's also in the top 6 or 7 best metro areas producing NFL talent. You got to have market share in those 2 areas. Central Texas is your backyard. You better have market share there, all right? And then I like what Sark said. We treat East Texas, Beast Texas, we treat that just like, hey, that's a corridor right on to Louisiana. We just treat it like one big old region, and we just recruit the hell out of it. And you should, because Louisiana is per capita always top 5 producing NFL players per capita. So I think that's where you start, because you'll never be able to wall off the state again. Mac did it, and RC did it. They did it for a little while, but that was about it. Not in modern recruiting. It's too nationalized now.
Yeah, it is. And, A&M moving to the SEC certainly opened the floodgates a little bit for the SEC to get into Texas. And, again, there's 450 D1 prospects in the state of Texas every year, and it grows as we add new 5 and 6A high schools all over the state. It just grows. You only get 25 a cycle. You can't keep them all. And I think Rod just said it right, and CJ did too. You recruit the pockets, you get South Dallas, you get the 5 stars, the key guys, and Houston needs to grow, East Texas, and then as they have not been shy to do, recruit the West Coast, recruit deep South, and get into the SEC and get after it. Good stuff right there, guys, without a doubt. We'll pick this up, of course, tomorrow morning with coffee and football and on Texas football. Rod and I will certainly do 5 hours of conversation on hornfm.com as we crank this up, and I'll look forward to a lot of Texas football talk, the latest on these portal players, the wide receiver from Oregon State. The wide receiver from Liberty is in the play, and CJ Daniels, Houston's defensive tackle, the linebacker from Alabama. We'll be covering it here on Texas football. Let me remind you one more time that tonight's live stream was brought to you by Energy Texas. Energy Texas is for Texans and by Texans here in the great state. When you call and got a deal with Energy Texas, which you should do, you're not calling out of the state overseas. You're dealing with Texans. They're proud to be from the greatest state in the union and prouder to be fighting for the little guy against big power. It's Energy Texas. Hey guys, good stuff right there. Happy Tuesday to y'all and everybody out there. Happy New Year. It's my first conversation with y'all since the actual in-game watch on New Year's night. So thanks to everybody who tuned into that and tuned in tonight. Appreciate it. Rod, get some rest. Give a hug to baby Monroe. CJ, you do the same. Great stuff as always. Thanks to everybody. Thank you to Matthew running this whole operation as smoothly as possible and as silk, as a matter of fact. And everybody have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow morning with coffee and football and on Texas football. Hook 'em, guys.
Hook 'em.